The warning bells rang across the elven city of Silvermere, and their sound made everyone stop what they were doing. Lyra dropped the crystal she was polishing and ran to the window of her workshop. Outside in the streets below, she saw hundreds of elves rushing in all directions. Some carried children in their arms, while others dragged bags filled with belongings. The sky above the city had turned strange and wrong. Dark shadows moved between the clouds, and they were too big to be ships from any friendly world. Lyra felt her heart beating fast in her chest, and her hand shook as she grabbed her communication device. She pressed the button that connected her to the dragon stables on the mountain above the city. Ember and Frost both answered, at the same time, through the mental bond they shared with her. They felt her fear and confusion, and they sent back waves of concern and protection. She told them to stay calm and to wait for her, but she could feel their restlessness. Dragons did not. Like being told to wait when their bonded partner was afraid, Lyra ran down the spiral stairs of her tower workshop and burst out into the crowded street. An older elf grabbed her arm, and his eyes were wide with terror. "They are coming, and the Deathworlders are coming, and we must leave now before they destroy us all." Lyra pulled her arm free and pushed through the crowd toward the council building. She had lived in Silvermere for 300 years, and she had never seen her people this frightened. The elven race was old and wise, and they had survived countless wars and disasters. But everyone in the galaxy knew about Deathworlders, and everyone feared them with good reason. These creatures came from planets that tried to kill them every single day. Their worlds had giant predators and deadly storms and diseases that melted flesh from bone. Simply surviving on a death world made any species stronger and faster and more dangerous than others. The galaxy had only encountered 3 Deathworlder species in recorded history. 2 of them had become peaceful traders after joining the galactic community, but the 3rd species was different, and they were called humans. Humans came from a world called Earth, and Earth was the worst death world anyone had ever studied. The report said that Earth had weather patterns that could destroy entire cities in minutes. It had animals that could kill with poison or teeth or pure strength. It had invisible creatures called bacteria and viruses that killed millions throughout human history. And somehow humans had not only survived but thrived and built civilizations and reached the stars. 3 months ago, the Calith Empire had made contact with human colony ships near the border worlds. The Calith were a powerful military empire that controlled dozens of star systems. They demanded that the humans turn back and leave Calith space immediately. The humans had tried to negotiate and offered trade agreements and peaceful passage, but the Calith commander refused to listen and ordered his fleet to fire on the colony ships. 20 Calith warships surrounded 5 human vessels, and everyone expected a quick massacre. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ships moved faster than anything the seer Calith had ever seen. Their weapons cut through Calith shields like they were made of paper. Within 10 minutes, all 20 Calith warships were destroyed, and the human colony ships escaped unharmed. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and every species felt the same cold fear. If humans could destroy a Calith battle fleet that easily, then no one was safe. The Calith Empire immediately declared war on humanity and called for allies to join them. They sent messages to every world they had contact with and painted humans as monsters who wanted to conquer the galaxy. The Elven Council had received the Calith request for military support 2 weeks ago. They had been debating what to do ever since, and the council was divided. Some elves wanted to join the Calith and help stop the human threat before it reached their worlds. Others argued that the Calith had attacked first, and that humans deserved a chance to explain. But now it seemed the debate was over, because the humans had come. To Silvermere, Lyra reached the council building and found the doors locked with energy shields. A guard stood outside, and his face was pale with fear. No one is allowed inside, and the council is in emergency session. Lyra pushed past him and placed her hand on the shield generator. Her magic flowed into the device, and the shield flickered and died. The guard tried to stop her, but she was already through the door and running up the main staircase. The council chamber was in chaos when she burst. Inside, 12 elder elves sat around a circular table, and they were all shouting at once. Holographic displays floated above the table, showing the human fleet in orbit around their planet. Lyra counted at least 50 ships, and each one was smaller than a Calith warship. But size did not seem to matter when it came to human technology. The council leader, Elder Theron, raised his hand, and the room fell silent. He was over 800 years old, and his white hair fell past his shoulders. His eyes found Lyra, and he did not look angry that she had forced her way inside Dragon Rider Lyra. And you arrive at the perfect moment. We need someone to make first contact with the humans, and you are our best option. Lyra felt her stomach drop, and making first contact with Deathworlders was not something anyone wanted to do, but she understood why they chose her. And she had 2 dragons, and she could escape if things went wrong. Another elder named Mira spoke up, and her voice was tight with worry. The human fleet has surrounded our planet, but they have not fired a single weapon. They sent one message asking for permission to send a diplomatic shuttle to the surface. We do not know if this is a trick or if they truly want to talk. Elder Theron looked directly at Lyra, and his expression was grave. You will meet them at the Crystal Tower landing platform. Take Ember and Frost with you for protection. If the humans show any sign of aggression, you will retreat immediately. Lyra wanted to argue, but she knew it would do no good. The council had made their decision, and she was the only dragon rider currently in the city. She bowed her head in acceptance and turned to leave the chamber. As she walked back through the streets, the crowds had thinned out. Most elves had already fled to the underground shelters or taken ships to the outer settlements. The city felt like a ghost town, and only guards remained at their posts. Lyra reached the base of the Crystal Tower and called out to her dragons through their bond. Within minutes, she heard the sound of wings beating. The air Ember appeared first, and his red scales gleamed in the fading sunlight. He was the size of a small house, and flames flickered between his teeth. Frost came right behind him, and her blue-white scales seemed to glow with inner light. She was slightly larger than Ember, and ice crystals formed in the air around her. Both dragons landed beside Lyra and lowered their heads so she could touch them. She felt their strength flow into her, and some of her fear faded away. Together, the 3 of them climbed the spiral path that wound around the outside of the Crystal Tower. The tower was the tallest structure in Silvermere, and it reached high into the clouds. At the very top was a landing platform made of pure crystal that could support even the largest ships. When they reached the platform, Lyra looked up at the sky. The human fleet hung in orbit like dark stars, and their engines glowed with blue light. She wondered what kind of people would cross the galaxy just to talk. She wondered if the Kaleth had lied about them being monsters. She wondered if she would survive the next hour. Then she saw it, and a single small shuttle breaking away from the fleet. It descended through the atmosphere, trailing white fire behind it. The shuttle moved with grace and precision and landed on the crystal platform without making a sound. The door opened slowly, and 3 figures stepped out into the fading light. They were human, and they were here, and everything was about to change. Lyra stared at the 3 humans who stood on the crystal platform and tried to match them with the monsters from the reports. The woman in front had dark brown skin and short black hair, cut close to her head. She wore a dark blue uniform with silver markings on the shoulders, and her boots were scuffed from use. Behind her stood a tall man with bright red hair pulled back in a ponytail, and freckles covered his pale face. The 3rd human was a younger woman with light brown skin and curly hair that fell to her shoulders. None of them looked like the savage warriors Lyra had expected to see. They were smaller than most elves, and their bodies seemed fragile compared to the combat soldiers of other species. But Lyra remembered the reports about human ships destroying an entire Kaleth fleet. She knew that appearances meant nothing when it came to death. Worlder's Ember growled low and deep, and smoke began to rise from his nostrils. The sound echoed across the empty platform like distant thunder. Frost spread her wings wide, and ice formed along the crystal beneath her claws. The temperature around them dropped so fast that Lyra could see her own breath in the air. The 3 humans stopped moving and raised their hands slowly with palms facing outward. The dark-skinned woman in front kept her eyes locked on Lyra and not on the dragons. Her expression was calm and open and showed no sign of fear or aggression. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the distance between them. My name is Commander Maya Torres of the Human Exploration Fleet. These are Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell and Ensign Beth Carson. We come in peace, and we ask for a chance to speak with you, and your counsel. Lyra felt surprise ripple through her. and the woman had spoken in perfect Elvish. The pronunciation was flawless and the grammar was better than some native speakers. She wondered how long humans had been studying their language and culture. Lyra kept her hand on the energy blade at her belt and did not move closer. Your fleet surrounds our planet and your weapons could destroy us in minutes. Why should we believe you come in peace when you arrive with such force? Commander Torres nodded slowly, as if she had expected this question. We brought our fleet because we did not know what we would find here. The Caliph Empire told every species in this sector that humans are savage monsters. They said we attack without reason and destroy everything we touch. We needed to protect ourselves in case those lies had turned you against us. But we did not raise our shields and we did not charge our weapons. Our fleet is here as a statement and not as a threat. If we wanted to harm you, we would have fired from orbit without ever landing. Ryan Mitchell took a small step forward, and his green eyes were gentle. We have been watching your broadcasts and listening to your music and reading your literature for months. Your people value wisdom and harmony and connection with nature. Those are not things we want to destroy, and they are things we want to learn from. Beth Carson pulled a small device from her pocket and held it up where everyone could see. We brought evidence and recordings of Caliph communications that we intercepted. They proved that the Caliph planned to invade Silvermere within the next few months. They wanted your crystal technology and your dragons, and they did not care about your people. Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat, and her mind raced with questions. The Caliph had been pressuring the Elven Council for weeks to join their military alliance. They had promised protection and trade routes and technology sharing, but they had also made it clear that refusing their offer would have consequences. Could it be true that the Caliph had planned to attack all along? Torres took another careful step forward and stopped when Ember growled again. I know this is difficult to believe, and we are strangers who arrived with warships, but please listen to what we have brought and then make your own decision. We will submit to any security measures you require. We will answer any questions you ask. All we request is a fair chance to present our side of the story. Lyra studied the three humans and tried to see past their calm expressions. She had been trained to read body language and detect lies across dozens of species. These humans showed no signs of deception, and their postures were open and non-threatening. But 300 years of life had taught her that skilled liars could fool even the best observers. She reached out through her bond with Ember and Frost and asked them what they sensed. Dragons had instincts that went beyond what any humanoid could understand. They could smell fear and aggression and malice on creatures from any world. Ember sent back feelings of confusion and curiosity. Instead of danger, Frost shared images of the humans standing still and waiting patiently like prey animals showing submission. Neither dragon felt the immediate threat they would sense from true predators. Lyra made her decision and gestured toward the entrance to the tower. You will come inside and you will show me your evidence. My dragons will remain with us at all times. If you make any hostile move, they will burn you to ash before you can blink. Do you understand and accept these conditions? Torres smiled, and the expression seemed genuine and reached her eyes. We understand completely, and we would expect nothing less. Thank you for giving us this chance. The three humans walked forward slowly and kept their hands visible at all times. Lyra noticed that they moved with a fluid grace that reminded her of trained warriors. Their steps were balanced and controlled, and they watched everything around them with sharp focus. These were not soft civilians who had never seen combat. These were soldiers who had survived battles and learned to stay alert. The group entered the tower through the crystal archway and began descending the spiral staircase. The walls glowed with soft, blue light that came from the crystal itself. Lyra led them to a meeting room halfway down the tower, and the space was simple with a round table and several chairs. She gestured for the humans to sit, and they did so without hesitation. Ember and Frost positioned themselves on either side of the doorway and watched the visitors carefully. Lyra remained standing and crossed her arms over her chest. Show me what you brought and convince me that the Caliph are lying. Beth Carson placed the small device on the table and activated it with a touch. A holographic display appeared in the air above the device, showing a recorded communication. The image showed 3 Caliph military commanders sitting around a table in what looked like a war room there. Reptilian features were easy to recognize, and their voices came through clearly. The first commander spoke in the harsh clicking language of the Kaleth. The elven world refuses to join our alliance, and this cannot be allowed to stand. Their crystal technology would give us a significant advantage over the human threat. We must secure it before the Deathworlders make contact with them. The second commander nodded, and his eyes gleamed with cold calculation. Our intelligence suggests the elves have fewer than 50 combat-ready ships. Their planetary shields are outdated and their weapons are primarily defensive. A quick strike would overwhelm them before they could call for help. The third commander leaned forward and his claws scraped against the table surface. What about their dragons, and could those creatures pose a problem for our troops? The first commander laughed, and the sound was harsh and dismissive. Dragons are animals and nothing more. We have stun weapons designed for creatures 10 times their size. Once we capture them, we can breed them and create our own dragon corps. The elven population will be relocated to labor camps and their cities will become military outposts. Lyra felt rage building in her chest as she listened to the recording. Her hands clenched into fists and her magic crackled around her fingers in visible sparks. These were supposed to be their allies and their partners in keeping the peace. But the Kaleth had been planning to enslave her people and steal their children and their dragons. Torres spoke quietly and her voice was steady and serious. We have 14 more recordings like this one. The Kaleth have been planning this invasion for at least 6 months. They attacked our colony ships to provoke us into a war. Then they used that war as an excuse to demand military alliances from every nearby species. Any world that refused would be invaded and absorbed into their empire. We came here to warn you and to offer our help. But the choice of what to do next belongs to your people and not to us. Lyra looked at the 3 humans and saw no triumph in their faces. They did not look happy to deliver this news, even though it proved they were telling the truth. Ryan spoke and his voice carried genuine concern. We know what it feels like to be betrayed by those you thought were friends. Earth almost destroyed itself in wars before we learned to work together. We do not want to see other species make the same mistakes we did. Beth added softly, and her eyes met Lyra's directly. We are not here to conquer or control anyone. We just want to survive and find a place in this galaxy. If that means fighting the Kaleth, then we will fight. But we would rather fight beside allies than fight alone. Lyra felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Everything had changed in the last hour, and nothing would ever be the same again. She looked at her dragons, and then back at the humans. We need to take this to the council immediately. The council chamber filled with angry voices as the elven elders watched the Kaleth recordings for the 3rd time. Elder Theron sat with his hands pressed flat against the table, and his face had turned pale with fury. Around him, the other 11 council members shouted over each other and argued about what should be done. Lyra stood near the back wall with Ember and Frost on either side of her. The 3 humans remained near the entrance with 2 elven guards watching their every move. Commander Torres stood perfectly still with her hands clasped behind her back and her expression calm. Ryan and Beth waited beside her and neither of them showed any fear. Despite being surrounded by hostile magic users and dragons, Elder Mira finally raised, her voice loud enough to cut through the chaos silence. And we must think clearly about this situation. The Kaleth betrayed us, but that does not mean we should immediately trust the humans. For all we know, these recordings could be false and created to turn us against our allies. Another elder named Kael stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Our allies and the Kaleth were planning to put us in labor camps and steal our dragons. How can you still call them allies after hearing that? Mira remained calm and her voice stayed level and controlled. I am simply saying we must verify everything before making a decision that could lead to war. The humans could have fabricated these recordings to gain our support against the Kaleth. We know almost nothing about human technology and what they are capable of. Torres stepped forward and spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. Elder Mira raises a valid concern, and we expected you to question the authenticity of the evidence. That is why we also brought the raw data files and transmission codes and encryption keys. Any of your technical experts can verify that these recordings came directly from Kaleth military channels. We did not alter them in any way. Elder Theron looked at Torres with eyes that had seen centuries of lies and truth. Why should we believe anything you say when your species destroyed 20 Kaleth warships in minutes? You are Deathworlders, and everyone in the galaxy knows that Deathworlders are dangerous. Torres met his gaze without flinching, and her voice remained steady. Yes, we are from a death world, and yes, we are dangerous when we need to be. But dangerous does not mean evil, and strength does not mean cruelty. The Kaleth attacked our civilian ships without warning and killed families with children. We defended ourselves, and we tried to negotiate even after they fired first. When they refused to talk, we had no choice but to fight back. Ryan stepped forward, and his voice carried across the chamber. I lost my sister in that first attack, and she was a teacher on one of the colony ships. She had 3 children, and they all died when the Kaleth fired on the civilian quarters. We could have responded with rage and destroyed every Kaleth world we could. Instead, we came here to warn potential victims and to try to build alliances. That should tell you something about who we really are. The chamber fell silent, and several elders looked uncomfortable. Lyra felt something shift in the room, and the anger was fading into uncertainty. Beth spoke next, and her young voice seemed out of place among all the ancient elves. My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth before we reached the stars. She said our world tried to kill us every single day with storms and earthquakes and diseases. But the worst dangers were never from nature, and they were from each other. Humans spent thousands of years fighting wars over land and resources and beliefs. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times before we finally learned to work together. We know what it costs to choose violence over cooperation. That is why we are here talking, instead of attacking. Elder Kale looked at the 3 humans, and his expression had softened slightly. What exactly are you offering us if we believe your story? Torres pulled out another device and activated a different holographic display. This one showed technical specifications and ship designs and defensive systems. We are offering a defensive alliance and not a military conquest. We will share our shield technology, which is significantly more advanced than what the Kaleth have. We will help you upgrade your planetary defenses and train your people in modern combat tactics. In exchange, we ask for permission to establish a small embassy on Silvermere. We also hope to learn from your crystal technology and your bond with dragons. But we will not take anything that you do not freely give. Elder Theron studied the display, and his fingers traced through the holographic images. These shield designs are remarkable, and they would make our cities nearly impossible to attack. But what happens when the Kaleth discover we have allied with you? They will see it as an act of war. Torres nodded, and her expression grew serious. The Kaleth will attack you whether you ally with us or not. Their invasion plans are already in motion, and they are just waiting for the right moment. At least with us as allies, you will have a chance to defend yourselves. Without our help, your people will be enslaved within months. Mira spoke again, and her voice had lost some of its hostility. How many other worlds have you approached with this offer? Beth answered, and her tone was matter-of-fact. 17 so far, and 12 have agreed. To defensive alliances, 3 are still considering our proposal. 2 rejected us completely and chose to trust the Kaleth instead. Torres added quietly, and those 2 worlds were attacked last week. The Kaleth claimed it was a training exercise that went wrong, but our intelligence suggests it was a test of their invasion capabilities. The room fell silent again, and this time the silence felt heavy with fear. Lyra could see the elders exchanging worried glances and calculating their options. She knew they were trapped between 2 impossible choices: trust the humans and risk war with the powerful Kaleth Empire, or trust the Kaleth and risk being invaded and enslaved. Elder Theron stood up slowly and looked around at the other council members. We need to vote, and all those in favor of accepting the human alliance, raise your hands. 6 hands went up immediately, including Theron himself. 2 more hands rose after a moment of hesitation. That left 4 elders with their hands down, including Mira. Theron counted the votes and nodded with satisfaction. 8 votes in favor, and the alliance is accepted. He turned to face Torres and extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome to Silvermere, Commander. Torres, we accept your offer of alliance, and hope this is the beginning of a long friendship. Torres shook his hand and smiled with genuine relief. Thank you, Elder Theron, and you will not regret this decision. Ryan and Beth both bowed respectfully to the council. Lyra felt Ember and Frost relax through their bond, and the dragons had been tense since entering the chamber. She realized that her own shoulders had been tight with stress, and now she could finally breathe normally. But Mira stood up and her face showed deep concern. I voted against this alliance because I fear what it will bring. The Kaleth will not accept this betrayal lightly. They will come for us with everything they have. Are we truly ready to face that kind of war? Torres turned to face her, and her voice was firm but respectful. War is coming whether you are ready or not. Elder Mira. The Kaleth Empire has been expanding through conquest for decades. They crush anyone who refuses to submit. The only question is whether you will face them alone, or with allies beside you. Kale stood and addressed the chamber. Then we must prepare immediately. Our military forces need to be mobilized and our cities need to be fortified. How long do we have before the Kaleth attack? Torres looked at her datapad and scrolled through information based. On their current fleet movements, we estimate 3 to 4 weeks. That gives us time to install basic shield generators and train your defense forces. But we will need to work quickly and efficiently. Theron nodded and turned to Lyra Dragonrider. You will serve as our liaison with the human forces. You have already established trust with Commander Torres and her teamwork with them to coordinate our defense preparations. Lyra bowed her head in acceptance even though she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. She had woken up this morning expecting a normal day of crystal work. Now she was responsible for helping protect her entire world from invasion. Torres walked over to Lyra and spoke quietly. I know this is a lot to take in, and you have handled it with remarkable courage. We will do everything we can to protect your people. Lyra looked at the human commander and saw genuine concern in her eyes. She thought about how these Deathworlders had crossed the galaxy to warn strangers about danger. She thought about how they chose diplomacy, even after losing loved ones to violence. Maybe the reports were wrong about what made Deathworlders dangerous. Maybe the real danger was underestimating their capacity for compassion. Together they would face whatever came next, and perhaps together they would prove that strength and kindness were not opposites. They were two sides of the same coin. 3 weeks passed faster than Lyra thought possible, and Silvermere transformed from a peaceful city into a fortress. Human engineers worked alongside elven technicians to install shield generators around every major building. The crystal towers, that once glowed with soft decorative light, now pulsed with defensive energy. Lyra spent her days flying between construction sites with Ember and Frost carrying supplies and coordinating teams. Commander Torres had brought down 200 human soldiers and specialists from the fleet. They moved through the city with quiet efficiency and never complained about the long hours or difficult conditions. Lyra watched them work and noticed how different they were from what she expected. They laughed and told jokes and shared meals with the elven workers. They asked questions about elven culture and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Several humans had even started learning to play traditional elven instruments during their breaks. Ryan Mitchell became especially popular with the younger elves. He taught them games from Earth and told stories about human history that made everyone listen. Lyra often found him surrounded by groups of children who wanted to hear about the giant animals. On his homeworld, Beth Carson spent most of her time at the dragon stables with the other riders. She had fallen in love with dragons from the moment she saw them. The dragons seemed to sense her genuine affection and allowed her to come close without showing aggression. Frost had even let Beth touch her scales, which was rare for a dragon meeting a new species. One afternoon, Lyra found Torres standing alone on the wall overlooking the city. The human commander stared at the horizon with a worried expression. Lyra walked over and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. You are concerned about the battle, and can you tell me what troubles you? Torres glanced at her and then looked back at the horizon. Our scouts detected the Kaleth fleet 2 hours ago. They are moving faster than we anticipated and will arrive in approximately 36 hours. We have done everything we can to prepare, but I worry it will not be enough. The Kaleth are bringing at least 80 warships according to our latest count. Our fleet has 50 ships, and your people have 43. Even with our superior technology, we will be outnumbered. Lyra felt fear creep up her spine, but kept her voice steady. The Council is evacuating all non-essential civilians. To the underground shelters, our dragon riders are ready to support the fleet in orbit. We will fight with everything we have. Torres turned to face her fully, and her expression was serious. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. If The battle turns against us, and if it becomes clear we cannot win, will your council surrender to the Caliph, or will they fight to the end? Lyra understood what Torres was really asking. If the humans tried to retreat, would the elves see it as betrayal? She thought carefully before answering. The council voted to stand with you, and we do not break our word. If we must retreat to save lives, then we will retreat together. But we will not surrender to an empire that planned to enslave us. Torres nodded, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Good, and because I need you to know something about humans. We are stubborn, and probably more stubborn than we should be. When someone tells us we cannot win, we tend to prove them wrong. It is not always a good quality, but it has kept us alive on a world that tried to kill us. Lyra smiled slightly, and maybe that is exactly what we need right now. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations and last-minute adjustments. The civilian evacuation was completed by sunset, and the city felt empty and strange. Only soldiers and essential personnel remained above ground. Lyra stood in the main plaza with the other dragon riders as Elder Theron addressed them. You are the pride of our people and the guardians of our skies. Tomorrow we face an enemy who thought us weak and who planned to break us. Show them what it means to threaten the children of Silvermere. The dragon riders raised their weapons and roared their acceptance. Ember and Frost added their voices to the sound, and flames and ice filled the air. That night Lyra could not sleep and walked through the quiet streets alone. She found Ryan sitting on the steps of a fountain that had been drained for the battle. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and gestured for her to join him. Cannot sleep either. Lyra sat down beside him and shook her head. I keep thinking about what tomorrow will bring. I have lived for 300 years, but I have never been in a real battle. Ryan was quiet for a moment, and then spoke softly. I was in the battle against the Caliph when they attacked our colony ships. My ship was one of the few combat vessels escorting the civilians. I watched the Caliph destroy the transport where my sister lived for a few minutes. I wanted to kill every Caliph I could find, but then I saw human civilians helping wounded Caliph prisoners after the battle ended. They gave medical care to the same soldiers who had just tried to kill them. That was when I understood what it really means to be human. We can be fierce when we need to protect what we love, but we never forget that our enemies are also people with families and dreams. Lyra looked at him with new understanding. That is why you came here, to warn us instead of letting the Caliph invade. You wanted to save lives even though we were strangers. Ryan nodded and smiled sadly. My sister used to say that the measure of any species is not how they treat their friends. It is how they treat their enemies and strangers. I try to honor her memory by living up to that standard. Before Lyra could respond, the emergency alarm began to sound across the city. Both of them jumped to their feet and ran toward the command center. Torres was already there, studying multiple holographic displays showing space around the planet. Her face was grim, and the Caliph arrived early. The displays showed a massive fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Lyra counted the ships and felt her heart sink. There were not 80 Caliph warships. There were over 100. Torres immediately began issuing orders to her officers. All ships to battle stations and defensive formation delta around the planet launch. All fighters, and prepare shield generators for maximum output. Contact the Elven fleet and coordinate firing patterns. One of the human officers looked up from her console with alarm in her voice. Commander, we are detecting another fleet signature. Multiple jump points opening on the far side of the planet. Torres went pale, and reinforcements, and the Caliph brought reinforcements. The officer shook her head and her eyes were wide. No, Commander, these are not Caliph signatures. These ships are broadcasting human identification codes. The main display shifted to show the new arrivals. 12 massive human warships emerged from jump space. They were twice the size of any ship in Torres' fleet. Behind them came 30 more vessels of various sizes. Torres stared at the display in shock, and then her hand flew to her communication device. She pressed the button and spoke urgently. This is Commander Maya Torres of the Human Exploration Fleet, requesting identification from incoming vessels. Deep voice responded through the speakers. This is Admiral Catherine Hayes of the Human Defense Force aboard the carrier Defiant. We received your distress call 3 weeks ago and came as fast as we could. Sorry we are late to the party, Commander. Torres laughed, and the sound was filled with relief and disbelief. You are right. On time, Admiral, and welcome to Silvermere. The Admiral voice grew serious. We have been tracking the Kaleth Empire expansion for months. Your reports about their invasion plans confirmed our worst fears. The human government decided it was time to make a stand. We are here to help you draw that line. Around the command center, the human and elven officers began to cheer. Lyra felt tears running down her face, and she did not try to stop them. Ryan grabbed her in a hug and lifted her off her feet. We have a chance now. And we actually have a chance. Torres was already working with her officers to coordinate the two human fleets. The elven ships moved into formation alongside their human allies. On the holographic display, the Kaleth fleet continued moving toward the planet. They had not yet realized that the odds had just changed dramatically. Elder Theron appeared in the command center and looked at the display. His face showed the same relief that everyone else felt. It seems your people do not abandon their allies. Commander Torres smiled and met his eyes. We told you we were stubborn, Elder Theron. When humans make a promise, we keep it, no matter what it costs. Outside the command center, Lyra heard the roar of dragons as riders prepared to launch. She felt Ember and Frost calling to her through their bond. They were ready, and they were not afraid. She looked at the gathered humans and elves working together. She thought about how 3 weeks ago they had been strangers. Now they stood together against an empire that thought might made right. The Kaleth were about to learn a hard lesson. Deathworlders were dangerous, not because they were cruel. They were dangerous because they never stopped fighting for what they believed in. And right now, they believed in protecting Silvermere. The space above Silvermere erupted into chaos as the two fleets collided. Lyra sat mounted on Ember, back with Frost flying beside them as they launched from the surface. Around her, 30 other dragon riders climbed toward the battle, and their dragons roared challenges at the enemy. The vacuum of space should have been silent, but the dragons carried breathing shields around them. Inside those magical bubbles, sound traveled, and Lyra could hear the explosions and weapons fire. The Kaleth fleet had formed into 3 massive attack groups. Their ships were dark green and covered in angular armor that made them look like giant insects. Red beams of energy lanced out from their weapons and struck at the defending forces. The human fleet moved with precision that seemed impossible for such large vessels. Taurus ships formed a defensive sphere around the planet, while Admiral Hayes' forces pushed forward to meet the Kaleth head-on. The elven vessels stayed close to the human formations, and their crystal weapons added streams of blue light to the battle. Lyra guided Ember toward a group of Kaleth fighters that had broken through the defensive line. The small enemy craft were heading toward the surface to attack ground targets. Frost matched. Their speed and ice began forming around her jaws when they got close enough. Both dragons unleashed their attack simultaneously. Ember breathed a column of fire that melted through the hull of the lead fighter. Frost exhaled a blast of super-cooled air that froze another fighter solid. The frozen ship shattered into pieces when a piece of debris struck it. The other Kaleth fighters scattered and tried to escape, but the dragon riders pursued them. Lyra felt the thrill of battle singing through her blood and through her bond with Ember. She had never felt so alive and so terrified at the same time. In the main battle, Admiral Hayes' carrier, the Defiant, moved into position at the center of the human formation. The massive ship was 3 times larger than any other vessel present. Its weapons batteries opened fire, and dozens of red targeting beams locked onto Kaleth ships. What happened next made Lyra gasp in amazement. The Defiant launched hundreds of missiles that spread out in a wide pattern. Each missile had its own guidance system and tracked individual Kaleth vessels. The Kaleth tried to shoot down the missiles, but there were too many coming too fast. Explosions rippled through the Kaleth formation as the missiles found their target. 6 Kaleth warships were destroyed in the first volley, and 3 more were critically damaged. The Kaleth commander must have realized the battle was not going as planned. The enemy fleet began to regroup and pulled back to reform their attack pattern, but Torres had anticipated this move, and her ships surged forward to press the advantage. The elven vessels followed, and their crystal cannons punched through Kaleth shields with unexpected power. Lyra watched as the combined fleet pushed the Kaleth back toward the edge of the system. Then everything changed. A massive Keleth battleship that had been hanging back suddenly moved forward. It was twice the size of Admiral Hayes' carrier and covered in heavy weapons. The battleship opened fire and its main cannon released a beam of pure white energy. The beam struck one of Torres' destroyers and cut it in half. The two pieces of the ship tumbled away, and emergency pods began launching from the wreckage. Lyra felt sick, watching the destruction, but there was no time to mourn. The Keleth battleship fired again and another human ship took critical damage. Admiral Hayes' voice came through the communication channel and reached all Allied ships. All vessels focus fire on that battleship and Dragon. Riders, keep the fighters off our backs. We need to take down that monster before it tears through our entire fleet. Lyra pulled Ember into a tight turn and headed toward a swarm of Keleth fighters. These were protecting the battleship and trying to stop human bombers from getting close. The Dragon Riders spread out and engaged the enemy fighters in dozens of individual duels. Lyra lost track of how many fighters Ember destroyed with his flames. She lost count of how many times Frost saved them by freezing an enemy that got too close. Her arms ached from holding onto Ember and her mind felt stretched thin from the constant danger. But she refused to retreat and refused to let the Keleth reach the planet below the main battle Ryan piloted, a human fighter craft toward the Keleth battleship. Beth sat in the gunner seat behind him and managed their weapon systems. They were part of a strike force of 20 small craft, trying to get close enough to damage the battleship engines. Ryan's voice came through the team communication channel. Stay tight and watch for their point defense systems. Those cannons will shred us if we give them a clear shot. The strike force weaved through the battlefield and dodged debris and weapons fire. 2 fighters were destroyed before they got within attack range. The rest pressed forward and launched their torpedoes at the battleship rear section. Most of the torpedoes were shot down by Keleth defenses, but 3 got through and struck the engine housing. Explosions rippled along the battleship hull and its forward momentum slowed. Beth cheered and whooped with excitement. We got them and their engines are damaged. Ryan allowed himself a small smile but kept his focus on flying. Do not celebrate yet, and we still need to get out of here alive, as they turned to retreat. A Keleth fighter appeared directly in front of them. Ryan jerked the controls and barely avoided a collision. Beth fired their rear guns and caught the enemy fighter with a direct hit. The Keleth ship spun away, trailing smoke and debris back at the command center. Torres watched the battle displays with intense concentration. The Keleth were falling back, but they were not defeated yet. They had lost 20 ships but still outnumbered the Allied forces. Elder Theron stood beside her and his face showed strain. How much longer can we hold them? Torres did not look away from the displays, as long as we need to, and humans do not know when to quit. The Keleth are learning that the hard way. Admiral Hayes' carrier fired another massive volley at the damaged Keleth battleship. This time the targeting was perfect, and the missiles struck the already weakened engine section. The battleship engines exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The massive vessel began to drift without power and its weapons went silent. Across the battlefield the Keleth fleet hesitated. Losing their command ship was a blow they had not expected. Torres saw the opening and immediately gave orders. All ships advance and press the attack while they are disorganized. The human and elven fleets surged forward as one unified force. The Keleth tried to reform, but their coordination was broken. Ship after ship took damage and began to retreat. Within 20 minutes, the Keleth formation had completely collapsed. Their remaining vessels turned and fled back toward the jump point. Admiral Hayes' voice came through the communication channel. Should we pursue? Torres considered for a moment and then responded. Negative, Admiral, and let them go. We accomplished our objective and Silvermere is safe. Pursuing them would cost lives we cannot afford to lose. The Allied fleet held position and watched the Keleth retreat. Lyra guided Ember back toward the surface with Frost flying beside. Her body felt like it was made of lead and exhaustion hit her all at once. Around her the other Dragon Riders descended and several of them were wounded. But they were alive. And they had won. When Lyra landed at the Crystal Tower she could barely slide off Ember back. Her legs almost gave out, but Ryan was there to catch her. He looked just as exhausted as she felt, and his flight suit was scorched in several places. We did it, and we actually did it. Lyra nodded and leaned against him for support. Yes, And thanks to humans who cross galaxies to help strangers. Ryan smiled and looked up at the sky where the human fleet still maintained defensive positions. That is what we do, and we stand tall when others need us, even when the odds seem impossible. Torres appeared a few minutes later and gathered everyone in the plaza. Her uniform was wrinkled and she had dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was strong when she addressed the assembled humans and elves today. We proved that cooperation is stronger than conquest. We showed the Kaleth Empire that some lines cannot be crossed. We stood together and people who were strangers 3 weeks ago. Now we are friends and allies who bled together. The crowd erupted into cheers and dragons roared their approval. Elder Theron stepped forward and placed his hand on Torres' shoulder. Silvermere owes humanity a debt we can never fully repay. But we will spend the rest of our days trying. Torres shook her head and smiled. You owe us nothing. Elder Theron, we are the ones who are grateful. You gave us a chance when you had every reason to fear us. You looked past the stories about Deathworlders and saw the truth. That is worth more than any debt. Lyra looked around at the faces surrounding her. Humans and elves standing side by side, dragons and spacecraft sharing the same sky. 3 weeks ago she had feared the arrival of Deathworlders. Now she understood that being from a death world did not make someone a monster. It made them survivors who learned the value of life. It made them fighters who understood the cost of violence. It made them friends who would cross the galaxy to protect those who needed help. The Kaleth had been wrong about humans, and Lyra would make sure the rest of the galaxy learned the truth. Deathworlders were dangerous, but only to those who chose tyranny over freedom, only to those who valued conquest over cooperation. The humans had stood tall when it mattered most, and Silvermere would stand with them for all the years to come.